The soft, ambient lighting of their Manhattan apartment felt suddenly suffocating. Charlotte stood before the hallway mirror, adjusting the collar of her sleek designer coat, smelling faintly of a sharp, unfamiliar sandalwood cologne. "I just don't understand why you can't be more like Julian," she had sighed, her voice laced with pity. Daniel had smiled tightly, watching her leave for yet another late-night strategy session. But the illusion of their quiet marriage shattered the moment he picked up the discarded dry-cleaning ticket she had dropped, only to find it was actually a time-stamped room receipt from the Meridian. The dark descent into the truth had just begun. If you love deep, slow-burn stories about the devastating cost of betrayal, stay with me as this unfolds. The soft hum of the city traffic below was entirely drowned out by the sharp, rhythmic clicking of Charlotte's heels against the hardwood floor. Daniel sat on the edge of their bed, watching his wife of 7 years expertly apply a coat of crimson lipstick. She was preparing for another late-night strategy dinner at Kingsley & Partners. "Julian closed the Ashford account today," Charlotte said, her voice muffled slightly as she pressed her lips together. She met Daniel's gaze in the vanity mirror. "He just takes what he wants. He doesn't wait for permission." Daniel offered a tight, practiced smile. "That's great, Char, truly." She sighed, setting the gold tube down with a sharp clink. Turning to face him, her eyes swept over his comfortable, worn-in sweater, a stark contrast to the tailored silk blouse she wore. "Sometimes I just wonder," she murmured, the words dripping with casual cruelty. "Why can't you be more like him? Like my boss? He has this drive. You're just so complacent, Daniel." The question hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating fog. Daniel swallowed the bitter taste of inadequacy. He was an architect, steady and reliable, but he wasn't a ruthless corporate shark. "I'll try to be more ambitious," he lied softly. Charlotte grabbed her designer clutch, barely acknowledging his response. "Don't wait up. Julian said this might take a while." When the front door clicked shut, the silence of the apartment felt deafening. Daniel exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He walked into the hallway to hang up the beige trench coat she had carelessly tossed over a chair earlier that evening. As he lifted the heavy fabric, something slipped from the deep pocket and fluttered onto the Persian rug. He bent down, picking up the small, crisp piece of paper. It wasn't a dry cleaning ticket. It was a receipt. The logo at the top belonged to the Meridian, an ultra-luxury boutique hotel downtown. The date was from 2 days ago, a Tuesday afternoon when Charlotte claimed she was stuck in back-to-back boardroom meetings. The charge was for a penthouse suite, paid in cash, but the name on the incidental folio wasn't Charlotte's. It was Julian St. James. Daniel stared at the printed ink until the letters began to blur. The faint scent of Charlotte's expensive floral perfume still lingered on the coat in his hand, but now, beneath it, he recognized something else. A sharp, unfamiliar trace of men's sandalwood cologne. His wife wanted to know why he couldn't be more like her boss. As his thumb traced the jagged edge of the hotel receipt, Daniel's chest tightened with a dark, unfamiliar resolve. He was about to find out exactly who Julian St. James really was. The morning sun bled through the blinds, casting sharp, fractured lines across the kitchen island. Daniel stood by the espresso machine, the ceramic mug warming his numb fingers. He had not slept a single hour. The crumpled receipt from the Meridian felt like a burning ember in his pocket, a heavy secret he carried as Charlotte breezed into the room. She looked immaculate, her armor of charcoal silk and sharp tailoring firmly in place. "Morning," she murmured, barely glancing his way as she reached for her travel mug. Her phone, which used to sit haphazardly on the counter, was placed deliberately face down next to the fruit bowl. Daniel watched the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes darted toward the dark screen every time a phantom vibration seemed to occur. The primitive instinct to slam the hotel receipt onto the marble countertop screamed in his mind. He wanted to demand an explanation, to shatter her perfect composure. But he forced the anger down, burying it deep beneath the mask of the dull, unobservant husband she believed him to be. If he confronted her now, she would weave a flawless corporate lie, a confidential client meeting, an impromptu strategy session. He needed more than a piece of paper. He needed the undeniable truth. "Have a good day at the firm," Daniel said, his voice terrifyingly even. Charlotte offered a distracted nod, her mind already miles away. "Julian wants to review the quarterly projections before noon. I'll probably be late again tonight." When the heavy front door finally closed behind her, the silence returned to the apartment, thick and suffocating. Daniel moved methodically through the rooms. He didn't tear the place apart. He simply observed. He walked into her small home office, a space usually dedicated to dry spreadsheets and glossy client portfolios. There, resting purposefully on the corner of her mahogany desk, was a book that didn't belong. It was a rare, leather-bound edition of a Machiavellian business philosophy text, The Architecture of Influence. Charlotte wasn't a collector of vintage books, nor did she read philosophy. Daniel picked it up, the aged leather cold against his palms. Opening the heavy cover, he found an inscription on the title page, penned in sharp, arrogant black ink, for Charlotte. "To the woman learning how to take exactly what she wants. J." Daniel's thumb traced the ink, his chest hollowing out. As he slowly flipped through the thick, gilt-edged pages, noticing heavily underlined passages about leverage and control, the binding felt unusually stiff near the back cover. He turned to the final chapter. Carefully concealed beneath the inner flap of the dust jacket was a sleek, matte black piece of plastic. He slid it out with trembling fingers. It was an unmarked electronic keycard, devoid of any branding save for a tiny, embossed silver M in the top right corner. The Meridian. Julian wasn't just taking his wife to a hotel for an afternoon. He had given her permanent, unrestricted access to a private world. Daniel stared at the black card resting in his palm, realizing with chilling clarity that his marriage wasn't just casually broken. It had been hijacked by a predator who treated people like disposable acquisitions. The crystal chandeliers of the Kingsley and Partners annual gala cast a cold, fractured light across the crowded ballroom. Daniel stood near a towering ice sculpture, a glass of untouched bourbon warming in his hand. He was the perfect accessory tonight, the quiet, supportive husband dressed in a standard black tuxedo, a stark contrast to the aggressive wealth surrounding him. Charlotte had abandoned him by the bar 20 minutes ago, drawn into the magnetic orbit of the firm's elite. And there he was, Julian St. James. Julian was everything Charlotte had bitterly claimed Daniel was not. He moved through the room with the predatory grace of a man who owned the air he breathed, his bespoke charcoal suit practically radiating authority. Daniel watched from the periphery as Charlotte approached her boss. The transformation in his wife was instantaneous and sickening. Her usual sharp, corporate edge melted into a soft, deferential posture. She tilted her head slightly, exposing her neck as she laughed at something Julian whispered. Daniel's grip on his glass tightened until his knuckles turned bone white. The dilemma clawed at his chest, stride across the marble floor and shatter the arrogant smirk on Julian's face, or swallow the bile in his throat and play the oblivious fool. If he caused a scene now, he would be dismissed as the jealous, inadequate husband, losing any chance to use the black keycard burning a hole in his pocket. He chose the humiliation. He chose the long game. From across the room, Julian's hand reached out, ostensibly to guide Charlotte toward a group of investors. But the gesture was entirely too low, his palm resting on the small of her back with a familiar, possessive weight. His fingers lingered, tracing the invisible line of her spine through the heavy silk of her emerald evening gown. It was a micro-expression of ownership, completely invisible to the wealthy sycophants surrounding them, but blindingly obvious to a husband looking for the truth. Charlotte didn't flinch. She leaned into the touch. The physical reality of the betrayal hit Daniel like a physical blow, stripping away any lingering, desperate hope that the hotel receipt was somehow a misunderstanding. As the group moved toward the terrace, Julian briefly met Daniel's gaze across the sea of tailored suits. The older man's eyes were cold, flat, and entirely dismissive, a silent acknowledgement of Daniel's irrelevance. Then, Julian leaned in and whispered into Charlotte's ear. She nodded, a faint flush creeping up her neck, and immediately pulled out her phone to type a message. A second later, Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his wife. "Julian needs me to finalize the Ashford merger files tonight. I'll be staying at the corporate suite downtown. Don't wait up." Daniel slipped a hand into his inner jacket pocket, his thumb running over the smooth edge of the matte black keycard he had taken from her hidden book. She wouldn't be at the penthouse until tonight, which meant the luxury suite at the Meridian was currently empty, waiting for him. The midday sun glared off the glass facade of the Meridian. Daniel bypassed the polished reception desk, his pulse a steady, heavy drum in his ears. He stepped into the private resident elevator, sliding the matte black keycard into the unlabeled security slot. The machine hummed to life instantly, ascending smoothly to the penthouse level without a single button press. When the steel doors parted, Daniel stepped into a realm of staggering, sterile luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping, panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported marble floors. The silence was absolute, save for the faint, mechanical breath of the climate control. As he moved deeper into the cavernous suite, the sensory evidence of his wife's betrayal assaulted him. A discarded charcoal silk tie draped carelessly over a velvet armchair. Two crystal glasses resting on the glass coffee table, bearing the faint smudges of crimson lipstick. And there, on the nightstand of the sprawling master bedroom, lay a familiar pair of pearl earrings Daniel had bought Charlotte for their 3rd anniversary. The air in the bedroom was thick with the ghosts of their intimacy, a suffocating blend of Charlotte's expensive floral perfume and Julian's sharp sandalwood cologne. Daniel stood frozen, the reality of the physical space threatening to crush his lungs. The dilemma was immediate. Walk away now with the absolute, agonizing certainty he sought, or dig further into the predator's den. Leaving meant safety. Staying risked walking in on housekeeping, or worse, Julian returning early. But Daniel's architectural training had wired him to look for structural flaws, to see beneath the polished surface of a facade. He forced himself to turn away from the unmade bed and walked into the adjoining private study. Julian's heavy oak desk was immaculate, exuding the same arrogant control as the man himself. But the bottom drawer was slightly ajar, snagged on a thick, leather-bound portfolio. Daniel crouched down and pulled it open. It wasn't a collection of corporate strategy notes or client profiles. It was a meticulously organized physical ledger, a tangible, arrogant backup to whatever digital shadows Julian kept. Daniel flipped open the heavy cover, his breath catching in his throat. The pages were a chilling testament to systematic predation. He found columns of discrete financial transfers, Kingsley and Partners corporate funds routed to offshore accounts, matched meticulously with names. Not just Charlotte's. There were 5 other women listed over the past 4 years. Beside each name were clipped photographs, copies of damning emails, and carefully documented leverage. Julian wasn't merely having affairs. He was manufacturing entrapment. He used embezzled company money to fund his lavish penthouse lifestyle, building a web of blackmail so tight that none of his victims could ever speak out without destroying their own careers. Daniel's blood turned to ice as he turned to the most recent, unfinished page. Charlotte's name was written in Julian's sharp, elegant handwriting. But beside it wasn't a romantic note. It was a drafted corporate authorization form, systematically positioning Charlotte as the primary signatory on the very accounts Julian was currently bleeding dry. The quiet hum of the penthouse climate control felt like a countdown clock pounding against Daniel's temples. He stared at the ledger, the neat columns of numbers and names blurring into a terrifying, inescapable snare. The realization hit him with sickening force. Julian wasn't just a wealthy boss taking advantage of a willing subordinate. He was a predator methodically preparing his next meal. Charlotte, blinded by ambition and the illusion of power, was standing on a trapdoor that Julian was about to spring. The dilemma was agonizing. Every instinct as a husband screamed at him to pull out his phone right now, to send her a desperate, anonymous warning, to drag her away from the edge of the cliff. But the cold, calculating architect within him knew the structural reality of the situation. If he warned Charlotte now, she wouldn't believe him. She would run to Julian with the warning, blinded by her infatuation, giving the older man the exact leverage he needed to destroy the evidence and turn the blame entirely onto her. Warning her meant losing the war to save a single battle. Remaining silent meant watching his wife walk willingly into a corporate slaughterhouse. He chose the silence. He chose the destruction of Julian St. James. Daniel's hands shook violently as he pulled out his phone, steadying his breathing, and began photographing every single page of the leather-bound ledger. He worked with methodical, frantic precision. He captured the offshore account numbers, the falsified Kingsley and Partners expense reports, and the chillingly detailed blackmail notes concerning the other 5 women. His phone's memory filled with the digital ghosts of ruined careers and shattered lives. When he reached the final, drafted authorization form bearing Charlotte's forged signature, the document that would frame her for the massive embezzlement, he paused. The sight of her name, written in Julian's arrogant hand, was a physical blow. She thought she was ascending to the top of the corporate ladder, completely unaware that she was being positioned as the perfect, disposable fall guy for a multi-million-dollar fraud. Daniel finished the last photograph, his heart hammering against his ribs. He carefully replaced the ledger in the slightly ajar bottom drawer, arranging the dust and the heavy oak exactly as he had found it. He moved backward through the study, smoothing out the invisible footprints on the Persian rug. The silence of the penthouse was no longer merely luxurious. It was a loaded weapon. As the elevator doors closed behind him, sealing away the smell of sandalwood and betrayal, Daniel's phone vibrated violently in his pocket. It wasn't a text from Charlotte. It was an unknown number, displaying a local Manhattan area code. He answered, his voice devoid of emotion. Yes, Daniel Foster? The voice on the other end was a woman's, sharp, guarded, and laced with an exhaustion he immediately recognized. We need to talk. Right now. The rain began as a fine, stinging mist, slicking the cobblestone streets of the meatpacking district. Daniel sat in a dimly lit corner booth of a dive bar entirely devoid of the polished mahogany and crystal chandeliers that Charlotte and Julian frequented. He nursed a black coffee, his eyes fixed on the entrance. The digital weight of the photograph ledger burned in his pocket. The dilemma chewed at his resolve. If the woman on the phone was a corporate spy or another of Julian's loyal pawns, his entire counteroffensive was already dead. But if she was real, she was the key to tearing down the facade of Kingsley and Partners. A woman slid into the booth opposite him, smelling of stale cigarette smoke and cheap rain. She looked to be in her late 30s, but her eyes held the hollow, exhausted stare of someone decades older. She wore a faded trench coat, a stark contrast to the sleek corporate armor she must have once worn. "You're Daniel," she stated flatly, not waiting for confirmation. She didn't offer a hand. "I'm Megan Taylor. I used to be the senior VP of acquisitions at Kingsley and Partners. Before Julian." Daniel studied her face, searching for the arrogant composure he had seen in his wife. Instead, he found only the brittle remnants of a survivor. "You called me," he said, his voice quiet. "Why?" Megan let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Because I saw the way your wife looked at him at the gala last night. I saw the way he touched her back. It's exactly how he touched me 5 years ago, right before he burned my career to the ground." She reached into her coat pocket and slid a plain, white envelope across the sticky table. "Julian doesn't have affairs, Daniel. He acquires leverage. He finds ambitious women, makes them feel invincible, and gives them access to the corporate accounts. Then, he bleeds the firm dry to fund his penthouse, his private jets, his habits." Daniel picked up the envelope, feeling the terrifying familiarity of the pattern. He slowly slid out the contents, copies of old wire transfers, forged signatures, and a termination letter citing gross negligence and embezzlement. It matched the meticulous, chilling entries he had just photographed in the leather-bound ledger at the Meridian. "When he gets bored, or when the auditors start asking questions," Megan continued, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "he hands over the evidence he's manufactured. He frames his mistresses for the fraud. I lost my career, my marriage, and almost went to federal prison. The firm quietly buried it to save their reputation, and Julian got promoted. She leaned in closer, the desperation raw in her eyes. Charlotte is his next fall guy, Daniel. He's already positioning her signature on the offshore accounts. The moment the board starts looking into the missing Ashford funds, she'll be the one holding the bag. And Julian will walk away clean. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place with a sickening, metallic click. Julian's arrogance wasn't just a personality flaw. It was a weaponized business model. Daniel stared at the damning paperwork in his hands, realizing that his wife wasn't merely cheating on him. She was unwittingly signing her own death warrant. The realization solidified his chilling resolve. The anger evaporated, replaced entirely by a cold, calculating architecture of vengeance. He's not walking away this time, Daniel said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. I have the ledger. The Sapphire Lounge was a sanctuary of hushed conversations, clinking crystal, and the subtle scent of expensive cigars. It was the unofficial boardroom of Kingsley and Partners, where million-dollar deals were sealed over aged scotch. Daniel stood in the arched doorway, his worn-in sweater replaced by a sharp, tailored suit he hadn't worn since their wedding day. The heavy silence in his chest was absolute. He had chosen the public execution. Across the dimly lit room, tucked into a velvet corner booth, sat Charlotte and Julian. They were leaning close, a laptop open between them, though neither was looking at the screen. Charlotte's hand rested intimately over Julian's on the mahogany table. She looked radiant, powerful, entirely convinced she was the architect of her own rapid ascent. Daniel walked toward them, his footsteps swallowed by the thick carpet. As he approached, Charlotte finally looked up, her manicured smile freezing into a mask of pure shock. Daniel? She breathed, quickly pulling her hand away from Julian's. What are you doing here? We're in the middle of a client review. Julian leaned back in his leather seat, his arrogant composure unshaken. He adjusted his bespoke cuffs, his cold eyes assessing Daniel with casual disdain. Mr. Foster, this is a private, firm-related meeting. I suggest you wait for your wife at home. Daniel didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply pulled out a sleek, unmarked tablet from his inner jacket pocket and laid it flat on the mahogany table, directly over their pristine quarterly reports. I'm not here for my wife, Daniel said, his voice terrifyingly even, cutting through the ambient jazz of the lounge. I'm here for the Ashford account. Julian's smirk faltered slightly, a microscopic tightening of his jaw. Charlotte stared at Daniel as if he had lost his mind. Daniel, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. You don't know anything about the Ashford. With a swift swipe of his finger, Daniel unlocked the tablet. The screen blazed to life, displaying high-resolution photographs of the leather-bound ledger from the penthouse. The first image was a heavily annotated list of offshore wire transfers, matching the exact amounts missing from the Kingsley and Partners escrow accounts. Page 42, Daniel stated clinically. $5.2 million, routed through a shell company in the Caymans to fund a private lease on the penthouse at the Meridian. He swiped again. The next image was the chillingly drafted authorization form bearing Charlotte's name. And here is the forged signature positioning Charlotte Hayes as the sole signatory on those exact fraudulent accounts. Daniel continued, his eyes locked onto Julian. The same tactic you used to destroy Megan Taylor 5 years ago. And Sarah Chun before her. The color drained instantly from Charlotte's face, leaving her ash white. She looked from the damning tablet to Julian, her eyes wide with a sudden, suffocating terror. The illusion of her powerful, charismatic lover shattered instantly. She wasn't an equal partner in a thrilling corporate romance. She was a disposable asset being groomed for federal prison. Julian, she whispered, her voice trembling. What is this? Julian didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on Daniel, the arrogant facade finally cracking to reveal the cornered predator beneath. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Foster. That's stolen property. It's evidence, Daniel corrected softly. He pulled a small, silver flash drive from his pocket and set it next to the tablet. And an hour ago, Copies of every page of that ledger, along with sworn statements from Megan Taylor and 3 other former VPs, were delivered simultaneously to the Kingsley and Partners Board of Directors, the SEC, and the FBI White-Collar Division. The silence at the table was absolute, broken only by the sharp, panicked breath Charlotte drew in. The empire Julian had built on manipulation and stolen funds was already burning to the ground. Daniel leaned in slightly, resting his hands on the edge of the table. "You asked me why I couldn't be more like your boss, Charlotte," he said, the words finally holding the weight of the last 3 days. He looked at the trembling, devastated woman who had once been his entire world. "I'm not like him, because when I build something, I make sure the foundation is real." He turned back to Julian, whose face was now slick with a cold sweat, realizing the inescapable trap he was in. The sirens of approaching police cruisers began to wail faintly in the distance, cutting through the Manhattan night. The wail of the sirens grew deafening, echoing against the glass facade of the Sapphire Lounge. Inside, the hushed elegance had shattered. The Kingsley and Partners elite, investors, senior partners, and sycophants, were staring, horrified, as 2 uniformed officers and a pair of plainclothes detectives strode through the arched doorway. Julian St. James sat entirely motionless in the velvet booth, his face a mask of pale, aristocratic fury. He didn't look at the officers approaching him. His dead, flat eyes were locked solely on Daniel. The realization that he had been systematically dismantled by an architect he deemed too complacent to notice an affair was burning through him. "Mr. St. James," one of the detectives stated, flashing a badge. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding multiple counts of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and extortion." Julian stood slowly, smoothing the lapels of his bespoke suit with trembling hands. As the officers moved to cuff him, he turned his venom toward the woman trembling beside him. "She signed the authorizations," he hissed, his voice a desperate, ugly rasp. "Charlotte Hayes. She was the one moving the Ashford funds." Charlotte flinched as if struck. The glamorous, powerful boss she had idolized, the man she had betrayed her marriage for, was instantly throwing her to the wolves to save himself. She looked up at the officers, her eyes wide with a frantic, animal terror. "No, I didn't know. He made me. Save it for the statement, ma'am," the detective interrupted coolly. He glanced down at the tablet Daniel had left on the mahogany table, noting the high-resolution images of the forged signatures and the detailed ledger of blackmail. "We have the originals and the statements from the prior VPs. We know exactly how he operates." As Julian was hauled away, his arrogant empire reduced to a perp walk through a luxury lounge, Charlotte collapsed back into the leather seat. She was completely broken. The ambition, the tailored silk armor, the superiority she had wielded against Daniel for months, all of it had evaporated, leaving only the crushing reality that she was a disposable pawn in a sociopath's game. She looked up at Daniel, her hands shaking so violently she could barely keep them in her lap. Tears cut through her flawless makeup, ruining the crimson lipstick she had applied so carefully before leaving him. "Daniel, please," she sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand toward him. "I didn't know he was doing this. I swear. I thought he loved me. I don't want to go to prison. Please help me." Daniel looked down at the woman he had loved for 7 years. He saw the desperation, the genuine terror, but he also saw the woman who had degraded him, lied to his face, and willingly traded their life together for the illusion of power. The dilemma was cold and sharp. Step back into the role of the protective, forgiving husband, or walk away and let the consequences of her choices crush her. He didn't take her hand. He didn't offer a word of comfort. Instead, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out the matte black keycard from the Meridian penthouse. He dropped it onto the table, the plastic clicking sharply against the polished wood. Next to it, he slowly, deliberately slid the plain gold band off his left ring finger. It landed beside the keycard with a heavy, final thud. Charlotte stared at the ring, the ultimate symbol of her devastation, a fresh wave of sobs tearing from her throat. "Daniel, don't do this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "You aren't sorry you betrayed me, Charlotte," Daniel said, his voice terrifyingly calm, completely devoid of the warmth she had once known. You're just sorry you chose the wrong predator. He turned away from the table, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. The ambient noise of the lounge, the shocked whispers of her colleagues, the static of the police radios, faded into a dull hum. As he walked toward the exit, leaving her entirely alone in the wreckage of the life she had chosen, he paused for a fraction of a second, looking back over his shoulder. I finally became the man you wanted, Charlotte, Daniel said into the silence. Someone who takes exactly what he wants, without asking for permission. He pushed through the heavy glass doors of the lounge, stepping out into the cold, cleansing rain of the Manhattan night, and didn't look back.